All right, welcome to Greek and Plain English Night 3. We are going to start with some actual grammar tonight. Last week we did the alphabet. The week before I rambled endlessly about language. So tonight we'll get into something a little bit meatier. There was a question asked about interlinears, and I had said initially to try not to get a super old interlinear because the Greek text might be different. So I'm going to take a minute to talk about that. Nowadays, most folks who do a serious Bible study and use the Greek text use one of two major texts that the scholars have prepared for the study of Greek. One is called the critical text, the other is called the majority text. Each of these two texts, the critical text and the majority text, both have two versions. The critical text has one that's called the Nestle Aland. It's the 27th version, or iteration, so it's referred to as NA 27. The other one is the United Bible Society, the 4th iteration. It's referred to as UBS 4. UBS 4 and NA 27 are the exact same text. They're just published by two different groups. The font looks a little different when you look at it, but they're the exact same Greek text. And they are the most current version of the Greek text that they believe is as close as possible to the original autographs of the text. The majority text, there are two versions of the majority text. The most common one that people use is by Zane Hodges and Arthur Farstad. So it's the Hodges-Farstad majority text. It's in its second version right now, second printing, I guess, second iteration. There is also an older one, the Robinson-Pierpont majority text. It is not affiliated with the Farstad-Hodge majority text, but if you're using a Bible program, Logos, BibleWorks, Accordance, and you see majority text, sometimes that'll be the Pierpont, the Robinson-Pierpont one. Okay, what's the big difference between the two? The main difference between the two is how the groups that prepared them approach figuring out how to handle variations. There are close to 1,000 existent Greek text fragments, copies, and so you've got almost 6,000 of these things. The earliest one is this tiny little fragment, about an inch and a half, and it's a fragment of the Gospel of John, and it's dated to within 150, 200 years of the writing of the text. Then you have a whole bunch of fragments and stuff, and then you have the big manuscripts that came out of the 4th century, Sinaiticus, Vaticanus, a couple of these big ones, Codex Alexandrinus. These are the big ones from about the 4th century AD, and then you have a whole bunch of other copies and everything, and then you have what are called lectionaries. Churches used to not have an entire Bible up there. They would just have the parts that were used in the church service, and so those are, we have old ones that are in Greek, so we have fragments of the text. Anyway, so you have all these texts. If we were to theoretically have a big table in the middle of the room, and we put all like 5,862 of these things out all next to each other, and we started looking, we'd notice that they agree 90% of the time. But we would find that there's probably 10% or so that don't agree. These little variants. And I mentioned this 2 weeks ago. Some of them are variants in spelling. Some of them are variants where a word is left out or added. The one text says Jesu Christu, the other one says Jesu. So we have Jesus Christ in one text, and the other one we just have Jesus. Omissions, additions, they're minor things. A few times we have significant differences. The Gospel of John, 8th chapter, begins with the story of the woman caught in adultery. That's not in a lot of very early manuscripts. Mark 16 has a much longer portion in some manuscripts than in others. This thing I just mentioned before we started here, the Johannine comma in 1 John, it's a Trinitarian reference, is not in some early manuscripts. But in general, with the exception of these big chunks, which, by the way, even if you left them out, they don't change anything, okay? But with the exception of these big chunks, most of these things agree. What scholars try to do is they try to say, how can we get down to exactly what Paul wrote, or what Matthew wrote, or what John wrote? And so they treat all these differences differently. They sort of make a set of rules. Well, if we have a difference, we think that maybe the most difficult version of the text is probably the oldest, because the tendency of a scribe would be to make something simpler or to make it more understandable. Sometimes they can match by spelling, well, a whole variety of things. So these two big differences between the critical text and the majority text has to be with how they figure out all these differences and which ones they choose, okay? If you're really into what's called textual criticism, which is the study of these various texts and the history and the transmission of the New Testament, these will be huge issues for you. And you will jump up and down, and you'll have spirited arguments, and you'll say, I'm a majority text guy, and then I'm a critical text guy, and they'll wave their fingers at each other, and as Christians are wont to do, divide and make little churches based around that and everything. So, I got to tell you, it's important, it's hugely important that good, godly men work super hard to try to get us the most accurate text possible. But some of this stuff is really in-house arguments that are better left to the guys who are really smart and want to argue it. As far as this class goes, and those of you playing along at home on the internet, it doesn't matter to me. You know, if your interlinear is a critical text or it's a majority text, I don't care. The other one that we hear a lot about is the Textus Receptus, the TR. That is the text that basically the King James Bible was, for the general, sort of the general story that you would tell about. That's the text that the King James Bible is based on. The Textus Receptus is probably the oldest version of the Greek text. Okay, the name Textus Receptus is Latin, and it means the received text. Now, some folks who are really, the King James is an important translation, and it's the translation they choose to use. They hold the Textus Receptus in high esteem, and they will tell you that the received text means that it's kind of received from God. It's a really important text, okay? In reality, the Textus Receptus got its name as an advertising slogan. What happened was, back in the 16th century, 1550 through 1660 and that time, if you had a book, you didn't have Amazon. So people, they couldn't, some guy up in a castle in 1550 in England couldn't go online and find the latest Greek text, right? So you had to sort of advertise your book on the front page of your book. And we still have that convention nowadays when we have books. You open up and there's this big title page in the front of your book. Most books still have that. Well, it used to be that's where you put that's where you told people how great your book was. And so for the Textus Receptus, this title page said in Latin, this is the text received by all to be the most accurate text, blah, 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 blah. It's a marketing slogan. And so we shorten it. When we refer to it in shorthand, we say the text received by all, in Latin, Textus Receptus. That became the name of this particular Greek manuscript. There's nothing wrong with the TR. I think if you're honestly doing study of different manuscripts, you need to have a copy of that, and you need to look at the critical text. You should look at the majority text, and you should look at the Textus Receptus at the TR, and you should compare them. I mean, that's, when you're in school and you're getting your master's and your PhD and this kind of stuff, that's part of what you do. But for our purposes of this class, you're going to be fine. Like I say, the only one you absolutely have to steer clear of is the New World Translation. Their Greek text is an old Westcott-Hort text. Westcott and Hort were two folks that did a lot of work on the Greek text. And there's nothing wrong with the Westcott-Hort text. It's just a very old text. But what they do with it's kind of ugly, so avoid that one. But the rest of the time you should be okay. Okay, that was an entire semester of textual criticism in 2.5 minutes. So, okay, tonight we wanted to start looking at a Bible passage before we get into the grammar to just see how this stuff works. Remember I said that we're trying to do three big things here. We're trying to learn how to read the Greek. We're trying to learn about all the grammatical terms, what they mean, and we're trying to get better at exegesis. We're trying to get better at studying the Bible and learning what it means. And so I wanted to start with just one of my favorite passages. Since it's my class, I get to start with any passage I want. And if you have your interlinear, or if you don't, if you have your just your English Bible, go to Ephesians chapter 2, and we're going to look at verse 8. And there's a really cool thing that happens in verse 8 that we see in the Greek that we don't see in the English. So, Ephesians chapter 2, verse 8. I'm going to read the Greek so you guys can kind of hear what it sounds. Remember, I told you I am not a native Koine speaker. You're going to hear Greek read with a Southern California accent. Okay? Verse 8, chapter 2, Ephesians. Tegar karate estis sosmenoi, diates pistuos, kai tuta uk ex humon, theu tadoron. The English, depending on the translation you have, is for by grace you have been saved through faith, and that not of yourself, it is the gift of God. Okay, the cool thing that we see in the Greek that we don't see in the English is this word, it's two words, este sosmenoi. In English, you'll have one of two translations. It will say, for by grace you have been saved, or it will say, for by grace you are saved, depending on the translation you have. That's because the Greek does this really cool thing where it has a past tense and a present tense at the exact same time. This is something Greek does, and it's absolutely perfect for this passage. What's Paul trying to talk about here? Paul is giving us sort of the technical description of what happens in salvation, right? We're saved by grace through faith. And he says, okay, when did this happen? Well, it really has two parts to salvation happening. And we all know this from our own experience, right? We know that a long time ago, salvation was handled, completed, finished on the cross, right? 2,000 years ago. But we also know that individually, each one of us, as believers, sort of took possession of salvation in our own life at a particular point in time. Some folks know exactly the date and the time what they're doing. Others kind of have a general feeling of, oh, I was in college when I really figured out what all this Christianity stuff is. Other folks would say, oh, absolutely, it was an evangelical crusade I was at. It was a Friday night. It was 9 o'clock, and I walked down that aisle and said the sinner's prayer. So the point is, we know at some point in our life, salvation became real for us, and we gained eternal life by trusting in Christ. Well, so you have this, it happened a long time ago, but then we also have this, it happened in our life right now. Well, Paul's able to tell us both of those things in this passage. Esti sosmenoi is what's called a periphrastic construction in Greek. And the big word there for saved, sosmenoi, is a perfect passive participle. That's right, we have a wonderful alliteration. You can go home and tell folks, tonight I learned about the perfect passive participle in a periphrastic construction.
Ephesians chapter 2
verse 8. And so, when you see this esti sosmenoi, this is what's happening. The periphrastic construction means that you have a past tense verbal idea along with a present tense verbal idea. The present tense word here is este, you are. Sosmenoi comes from the Greek word for to be saved, which is sozo. And the perfect passive participle form of sozo is sosmenoi. You don't need to know how it got into that, but it is. The present tense este form of the verb to be says you are. And it means exactly that. It's a present tense verb. The past tense idea is in this participle. It's a perfect participle. Now, we'll learn later on, several weeks from now, about different tenses in Greek. But Greek has 4 different ways to talk about the past. We've got the aorist, the imperfect, the perfect, and the pluperfect. Each of these sort of shades how we talk about the past a little differently. The perfect tense means that there was an action in the past that was fully completed, but the results of that action still exist into the present. So in this case, he's saying salvation occurred in the past at the cross, and it was completed. We all know, we read, Jesus says, it's finished, right? So salvation was completed at the cross, but the results of that still last into the future. Now we add that into the present. Now we add the present tense verb. So what Paul is saying here with this little phrase, estis osmenoi, is you are now having already been saved. Okay, it's an amazing thing that happens in the Greek that we don't have anything like that in English. So the best we can do is to focus on one of those 2 ideas of the verb. We either bring it over as a present tense, you are saved, or we bring it over as a past tense, you have been saved. But in the Greek, both things are happening at the exact same time. It's a wonderful passage, and it's the kind of thing that when you start looking at the Greek text, you know, it opens up all these layers. It just rings stuff home. My blog post for today was about how we say no in Greek, and there's a passage that it happens a lot in the New Testament. I happen to, for the post, I chose a passage in Hebrew, and when you drive down into the Greek, when you drill in there and look at it, it's a passage that says that God will never abandon us. And there's not even a possibility that He could abandon us, either actually or even conceivably. And you see that in the Greek, which we don't see so much in the English, and it just, you go, wow, that... If you're having a dark night of the soul and you think that God's not paying attention, and you read that verse and you say, wow, what the author of Hebrews was saying is that there's no way possible God would ever abandon me, it really does bring a lot of comfort to your heart, you know? And so the Greek text will help us as we get into this to see a couple of these extra things, like this idea of salvation with a past time as well as a current aspect to it. Okay, but enough about that. Let's talk about nouns. The book of Genesis gives us a little picture of the history of nouns. God had made all kinds of stuff, and He told Adam, okay, your first job is to name everything I've made. So Adam sat there and he named everything. He said, okay, that's a cat, that's a dog, that's a tree, that's a capybara, that's a lake, that's a rock. Well, what Adam was doing was he was creating nouns. See, nouns are words that represent people, places, things, or ideas, right? My name is John. That's a noun that represents me, a person. We're in Irvine. That's a noun that represents the place that we're at. This is a table. That's a noun that represents this thing. Love is an idea. Noun, okay? So nouns are words that represent peoples, places, or things, okay? That's the same in all languages. Nouns do the same thing. They always represent things. They're the names of things. Nouns in languages, well, actually all parts of speech and languages, but we're talking about nouns, so we'll look at this tonight, have 2 aspects, okay? They have a form and they have a function. The form isn't the big important thing. It's really the function that's important. But you still need to know the form in order to sort of just kind of get the lay of the land and figure out where you are. You know, a map is helpful to tell you how to get somewhere. Just looking at the picture of a place on a map doesn't mean you've experienced being in that place. Form and function are kind of the same thing in language. The form is like the map. It helps you get to the function. The function is what you want to know. Okay? So nouns function to tell us. They tell us who's doing the action. They tell us who's receiving the action. They tell us the name of something. They may actually, and we'll see in a little bit, they may use one noun to tell us something extra about another noun. Okay? So that's their function. Their form, we won't cover in this class the form of Greek nouns, but nouns in English we're used to, right? English is our main language that we work with, and so we're used to the form of nouns in English, and we don't even think about it. It's just sort of intuitive. We know that nouns have, they're just a, dog, cat, chair, table, book. These are all nouns. We don't even think about them, right? Their structure, their form. In Greek, nouns are sort of grouped into what are called declensions. There are 3 declensions in Greek, cleverly numbered first, second, and third. Okay? And all a declension is just simply the form. All nouns in Greek that look a certain way are first declension. All these other nouns that look a certain way are second declension. And then everything that's left over is third declension. We kind of have declensions in English, not the same way that Greek does, but in English we have, the best way to look at it is how we understand how we create the plural in English, right? In English, if I take the word book and I want to say that I have more than one book, well, I add an S to it, right? So book becomes books, right? If I have the word box and I want to say I have more than one box, I don't just add an S, I have to add an E and an S to make the plural of box, right? If this is surprising to anyone, let me know, because I'm assuming that you guys all get this. If I want to say, if I have the word baby, and I want to say I have more than one babies, I don't just add something, I actually have to change this word, right? I have to get rid of the Y, and I have to add IES to get my plural there, right? Here's another one. Let's say I have, we talked about the letter alpha coming from the word ox, right? If I have an ox and I want to say I have more than one ox, I have to add an EN on this one. So these all had S's. This one doesn't have an S. This has an EN. If I have the word fungus, it's kind of a disgusting word, and I want to make that plural, I get rid of the S, because fungus sort of has a Latin root to it, and I say it's fungi or fungi. Hey, I'm a fun guy. My niece and her husband are staying at my house. I call him my nephew-in-law, and he wears these great funky t-shirts. And he had one on today with a big picture of a mushroom with a funny face, and it said, "I'm a fun guy." So that gave me a great example for tonight, right? Some words I have to change. I don't add anything to the end of it all. Some words to make the plural. By myself, I'm a man. Since there are 3 males here tonight, we are men, right? Here I'm not adding anything. I'm changing that middle vowel, right? And then some words in English don't change at all, right? I have one sheep, and if I have a flock of them, I've got a flock of sheep. That doesn't change at all. Sheep singular, sheep plural, same form. So you can see in English we have all these different ways of making the plural. Well, if I were to group all the words in English that form their plural with just S, and group all of the ones that form their plural with ES, and so on, and I numbered, I said these are all number 1s, these are all number 2s, these are all number 3s, 4s, 5s, and so on, I would be creating declensions, right? It's just groups of words that are common in their form. Greek has 3 declensions, first, second, and third. The first declension are Greek nouns that end in either eta or alpha. Okay, that's first declension. Second declension are nouns that end in omicron. And third declension, to simplify it, is everything else. Right? I mean, they're actually, it's not literally everything else. They're limited, but it's easier just to say, if it doesn't end in an eta or an alpha or an omicron, it's going to be a third declension. Okay, first declension is mostly feminine nouns. There are some non-feminine nouns, but most of first declension is feminine nouns. Most of second declension is masculine and neuter nouns. And third declension, it's all over the board. Okay, so there's all three genders there. Okay, that's the form of nouns in Greek. You don't have to worry about that, okay, because when you're reading your interlinear, you don't have to worry that it's a second declension noun, okay? It doesn't matter to you, right? Because you're looking at what the word says, and you look at the English word under it. So when you see the word logos, you don't think, oh, that's a second declension noun. You say, no, it just says word, okay? Yeah, I'll tell you this anyway, so you know, if you take a first-year Greek class, then you run all the paradigms, and you learn to say, oh, logos, logu, logo, logon, you know, so you learn to run the paradigms on that. But this is just an overview of the form of Greek nouns. What's important isn't the form, but the function of the Greek nouns, okay? All right, let's look at function of nouns, because this is where we start getting into understanding the grammar. In English, if I say Tom hit the ball, okay? Tom hit the ball. What's the action here? It's hit, right? Hit's the verb. So if I were to make a diagram, I would write hit on my diagram in the verb spot. Okay? Tom is a noun, and it's the subject. Tom is the one doing the action. The subject is the function of the subject is to tell us who does the action, right? So Tom is now my subject, right? And then the object is the thing that receives the action of the verb. So the ball is what Tom hit. The ball received the action of the verb hit. So the ball then is my object. So the function of these three words, Tom is the subject, hit is the verb, and the ball is the object. Everybody tracking with me here, right? This is like high school English, okay? Without all the angst. So we have two nouns here. The form of the noun doesn't matter to us. It's where it is in the sentence, right? Tom hit the ball. If I switched Tom and the ball around, it would change the meaning of the sentence, right? If I say Tom hit the ball, that's a great play. If I say the ball hit Tom, that's a wonderful YouTube video, right? So the position of the nouns in the English sentence tells us what their function is. Do they function as the subject? Do they function as the object, right? English word order is important. English is called an SVO language. Okay, a subject, verb, object language, right? Because that's the order we do things. If you break out of that order, a sentence won't make sense. If I say, hit Tom the ball, that makes no sense at all, right? Hit Tom the ball, we go, whoa, 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 wait a minute, the verb doesn't come first. Why are you putting the verb first? Well, I got two nouns together after the verb. That doesn't make sense, because in English, it doesn't. In English, it has to be subject, verb, object. Greek is different. In Greek, word order doesn't matter, because Greek is what we call an inflected language. What does inflected language mean? Well, it means that what Greek does, in order to show you the function of the word, it changes the form of the word. And it does this most of the time by just adding a little ending onto it. An example would be, I didn't bring a red Sharpie thing here, so just bear with me on this. If I wanted to say this same thing, Tom hit the ball, in Greek, what I might do is I might go, Tom, and let's say I put a little S on the end of it there in parentheses, because that's the subject. And then hit, I put a little V onto hit. And then the ball, I put a little O over here on that. So now, whenever I looked at the word the ball, I would see that O, and I would know, oh, okay, that's the object in the sentence. And anytime I looked at the word Tom, I'd see that little S there, and I'd go, oh, well, that's the subject of the sentence. And anytime I see the word hit, I'd see that little V, I'd go, oh, okay, that's the verb. So now it doesn't matter what order I put these words in, because they have this little label on them that tells me what the function of the word is. Everybody tracking with that? That's what an inflected language does. Okay? An inflected language changes the form of the word so that we know what function it is. That's completely opposite what we do in English. In English, word order is important. In Greek, it's an inflected language, so it doesn't matter what the word order is. Okay, yes, it does matter what the word order is. There are some passages that in Greek, the word order means a significant amount. Greek has a tendency to like to put the important things up front in the sentence. So frequently you'll get the really important idea. If I was going to make this a sentence that was really important in Greek, I would say, hit the ball, Tom. Because hit's the important thing. And then I want to show you, what did he hit? Well, he hit the ball. Right? So I push that to the front of the sentence. Now, at the end of the sentence, then I put Tom. So Greek will move things around to show you emphasis. But in general, word order doesn't matter in Greek the way it matters in English. Because in English, the ball hit Tom means something completely different than Tom hit the ball. But in Greek, because there are these little markers on each word, it doesn't matter what order I put it in. That's what an inflected language does. Okay, in your notebooks, again, I'm sorry there are no page numbers. That's my fault for not providing them. If you go to Introducing Nouns, then you go to the second page over, you're going to see there's a list of 5 functions of a noun within the sentence. The functions of nouns in Greek are called cases. So the case of a noun is its function. So if I talk about the nominative case or the accusative case, I'm saying that's its function. Now, these 5 functions of nouns in Greek are nominative, accusative, or nominative, genitive, dative, accusative, and there's the vocative. A long time ago, when we used to learn classical languages like Greek and Latin, we had 8 cases. Fortunately, it's been condensed down to 5 cases. When I first started learning Latin back when I was a wee lad in school, we used the 8-case system. I am so happy that we only have 5 now. They didn't get rid of those other cases. They just realized that those other 3 cases kind of rolled up into one of the 5 anyway, so why spend the extra time on the ablative when you have the dative already, right? So if you have studied Latin, usually Latin is the folks that know the 8-case system. If you're an 8-caser, because you studied Latin a long time ago, please bear with my modern newfangled invention, and I'm only a 5-caser. But again, as Christians, we would want to divide over that, of course, form our own church of the 8-casers versus the first church of the 5-casers. Because we Christians like to divide. Okay, so what are the 5 cases? Well, each one represents a different function of a noun. The first one is the nominative. That's the easiest, that's the subject. Tom is in the nominative case. Case equals function. The function of Tom is the subject. Nominative is the subject. That's pretty easy, right? Okay. Nominative does one other thing, though. Nominative has one other thing that it does. Nominative, besides being the subject, can also be what's called the predicate nominative. This is one of those kind of grammatical words that you start thinking about what's being served at lunch in the cafeteria when you're in high school English and you hear this stuff. But the predicate nominative, this word predicate, it means it's saying something about it's predicating about the nominative. That's where that word comes from. If I say God is love, okay? If I were to diagram this sentence, I'd say, where's the verb? Oh, it's is. Okay, so there's my verb. And I'd say, well, what's the subject of the sentence? Well, God. God is. Is there an object? No, there's no object. There's nothing receiving the action of the verb. The sentence just is God is. But wait a minute, what about this noun love over here? Ah, love, it's not receiving the action of the verb, but it's saying something about God. It's saying what God is. It's predicating something about the subject. It's telling us that God is love. So God is the subject. Love is the predicate nominative. They're both nouns, and their form would look the same in Greek, but we would know from context that love is a predicate nominative, not just a subject nominative. Did I lose anybody, or is everybody still tracking with me on that one? Okay, okay. A lot of folks know about predicate nominatives because that's the big thing that they talk about when they're arguing a John 1:1 with members of the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society. And most folks know about predicate nominatives because they read the book by Walter Martin called Kingdom of the Cults, where he talks about the predicate nominative in John 1:1. Don't worry about any of that. We're not going to cover that tonight because that would take me another 45 minutes to do. But that's where most folks hear about this predicate nominative thing. The simple thing is, it's just saying something about the subject, but they're both in the nominative case. Okay. I don't think I lost anybody yet. Genitive is easy. Genitive is the case of possession. In English, I say, I don't say this is the book of me, right? I say it's my book, right? I don't say, oh, that is the coat of you. That is the coat of her, right? We don't say that in English. We say it's her coat, right? But that's the possessive, right? Greek actually says, this is the book of me. Okay, a lot of times when you say Greek in English, you end up sounding like Yoda. It's the Yoda effect. Go you must, right? And because that speech pattern that they created for that character in the movie is very reminiscent of a lot of other languages than English. And so when we pronounce Greek frequently, it kind of sounds like Yoda speak. So in Greek, I would say the book of me. And that word book would be in the genitive case, because the genitive case is possession. I mean, it's the same concept of English, of possession. There are some times where we run into strange things in Greek with the genitive. And again, this would be a couple of more classes to talk about this, but sometimes we run into what we call, is it a subjective or objective genitive? An example, if I say the love of God, okay? In Greek, that's in the genitive case. When you see the word of, that usually points you to the genitive in Greek. That's when you're learning Greek, they tell you when you're translating, bring it into English, use the word of. The book of me, okay? If I say the love of God, okay, there's my ofs. This is a genitive construction. Pretend that was in Greek, by the way. So now I look at this and I say, oh, okay. I may look at that and go, oh, yeah, that's God's love for me. The love of God just makes my life wonderful. But you guys may look at it and go, that's not what that says at all. What that says is the love of God. I love God. My love for God is what makes life wonderful, not God's love. How can you look at that and think it says God's love? What that means is my love of God. You see the ambiguity here? The genitive case sometimes is ambiguous. In Greek, and there's the problem, it looks exactly the same. The phrase, the love of God in Greek, whether we think that it's God's love for us or our love for God, in Greek looks exactly the same. Oy vey, as they say in Greek. What do I do? right? Well, context. You got to look at that. You got to look at context. Currently, there's a big discussion about the genitive and what we normally would translate faith in Christ. Some modern translators are saying, you know, that's not the case. The Greek there is in a genitive form. It really should be the faithfulness of Christ, not faith in Christ. That's a huge difference in how we read those verses. A gigantic difference in how we read those verses. The guys saying this aren't a bunch of wacko crazies who run around with it. They're legitimate guys who are trying to drill down in and make sure we understand what the language says the best it can say it. And they would never deny that eternal life comes by faith in Christ. These guys wouldn't deny that. But they're saying language-wise, it's one of these genitive constructions that we're not really sure about, because the Greek doesn't give us any hints which one it is. I'm still really comfortable with faith in Christ, and that's how I translate it. So I'm not quite as cutting edge as some of the modern translators might be. But just know that this genitive, while it's at the simple level just possession, at sometimes we're doing our exegesis, it can cause us to really think, oh, is it God's love for me or my love for God? What's going on here? Also, every time now that you go to Del Taco, you can call it genitive taco. That's what the Greek students that I used to teach came up with that, because they used to hang out at Del Taco by school, and they realized that Del in Spanish is the possessive, so they, geniuses that they were, came up with the idea of genitive taco. So, I don't know, but you feel...
Can I mention something?
Yes.
God is love, and in the Greek, the God has article, and the love no article. And I read about book that with article or without article, the big difference.
Yeah, the question is, does the phrase God is love in Greek, the article, the word the, if in that phrase God is love, if it says in Greek the God is love, is that different than if it said the God is the love, or if it said God is the love? So the question is, does the article make a difference? Let me say two things about that. First, I'm going to cover the article in a class by itself, so gosh, I don't want to give away all my fun stuff tonight, so I'll just give you a brief answer. Secondly, that phrase, God is love, we have to be careful to realize that kind of phrase with a predicate nominative, whether the article is there or not, is not it's not a reciprocal phrase. God is love does not mean love is God. Okay, you can't switch those back and forth. There's only one place in the New Testament that I'm aware of that you can readily switch those back and forth, and that's in John's Gospel when he uses ego eimi, when Jesus says the I am statements. I am the bread of life. That's a reciprocal statement. The bread of life is Jesus, and Jesus is the bread of life. God is love, you can't. Okay, the question about the article. Greek uses the article completely different than we do in English. In English, we have two forms of the article. We have the definite article, the book, and we have the indefinite article, a book. Right? You guys know, right? Okay. Greek just has one article. It doesn't have an indefinite article. It doesn't have a definite article. It just has the article. And Greek uses it in places that we don't in English. Case in point is the question that was asked. Frequently we'll see the God. Well, we don't translate. We just say God. Okay? Sometimes it matters that the article is there. In adjectives, when the article is there, it means that it's an attributive adjective rather than it means the difference between the king is good and the good king. Okay? So the article with adjectives makes a difference. Sometimes the article matters when we have a predicate nominative, like God is love. And this was what I talked about with what you might have read in Walter Martin's book, The Kingdom of the Cults. He talks about what's known as the Caldwell rule. There was a guy named Caldwell who was a Greek scholar who figured out that predicate nominatives, depending on where they are relative to the verb and whether they have the article or not, changes what the sentence actually means. There's been a lot of study of Caldwell's rule, and some folks might say that Caldwell's rule is not quite an ironclad thing. Depending on how you look at that phrase, God is love, it doesn't matter whether the article is there or not in that particular phrase. In John 1:1, the position of the article matters. And that's a similar construction, saying whether the Word and God are the same thing. There, the article matters in John 1:1. The article or the absence of the article. But in that example of God is love, if I said the God is love, yeah, that probably wouldn't matter that much in that example. John 1:1, it does have a bearing on it. And it actually has a bearing on whether it's equative or whether it talks about the is the Word and God the same thing? Are they two separate things? Are they different things that are the same substance? So depending on the use of the article there. And we'll cover that at some point when I talk about the article. In Greek, first-year Greek students love the article because it tells you what case the noun is in. A lot easier than looking at the nouns sometimes, especially third declension nouns, which are like all over the map. And you see the article and you see this, and you go, oh, that's a nominative singular masculine, because that's the word the in Greek for nominative singular masculine. And so no matter what the noun looks like, how crazy it is, you see this, and you go, oh, thank you, Lord, and you pass your test, because you know that's so the article is important in some cases. I would not say it's that important in that phrase, the God is love, but it is important in John 1:1. And because I don't want to keep you guys here 3 hours tonight, well, I'd love to do it, but you guys would be bored, you'd leave. I need to discuss the full thing on the article later. So those of you watching at home, tune in just a couple of weeks. We'll talk about the article. Okay, the dative case is the indirect object. Okay, if I say, well, the example in the notebooks that I use is I teach Greek to the students. Okay, the verb in the sentence is teach. The subject is me, I, right? I teach, and the object is Greek. I teach Greek to the students. That's the indirect object. See, in English we usually put the word to there. So in Greek they always tell you when you're translating the dative, always look for the word to. Just like the genitive, you look for the word of. In the dative, you'd look for the word to. Dative is where some of those extra cases, by the way, that I talked about rolled up into. And the extra cases would talk about the dative in respect to time or proximity. But again, those all roll up in Greek, the way we'll study it, under the dative case. The accusative case is the case of the direct object. Tom hit the ball. The ball would be in the accusative case. Right? Because it's the direct object. The direct object is that thing that receives the action of the verb. Okay? The direct action of the verb. Unlike the dative, where it's not receiving the direct action of the verb, the accusative is. The last one is the vocative case. Vocative case is it's the case of direct address. If I walked in here, if I was a really good preacher, kind of that good old fiery kind of Baptist preacher, and I went, brothers! That's in the vocative case, okay? When I'm addressing you. If I say students, it always helps if you yell when you use the vocative case, by the way, and gesture loud. You guys, you know, so students, women, men, brothers, those are all vocative cases. It's direct address. Okay, Greek nouns are going to be in one of these 5 cases. Every Greek noun in the text that you find will be in one of these 5 cases. And the case that it is tells you its function in the sentence. When you're reading a commentary and they say, oh, this is very important because it's in the accusative case, you guys now know that that means it's the object. It's receiving the object of the verb. So when you're reading the commentary or you hear a preacher say, this is really important because Paul put this in the accusative case, now you know what that means. The function of that word is the direct object. All Greek nouns have gender. They can be masculine, feminine, or neuter. There is discussion about gender in Greek nouns. whether it's the same as gender in English nouns. Gender is a kind of a slippery little thing in language. Not in real life. I mean, in real life you can tell the difference between a rock, a woman, and a man. Right? A neuter object, a feminine, or a masculine. Most of us can tell the difference. But in language, you know, words can have gender that's not what we would consider to be natural gender. Right? A lot of times we refer to ships and boats as her, as feminine. Right? Sometimes we may refer to an animal as a neuter object. Other times we may refer to it as a masculine or feminine object based on its actual natural gender. In Greek, even more so, you know, we look at a word and say, well, you know, what's an idea? What's love? Is love masculine? Is it neuter? Is it feminine? Idea words sometimes are tougher to pin gender on. So the thing about gender in Greek is, don't always look at something and go, well, that has to be feminine. Well, no, it doesn't have to be feminine. It can be a neuter gender, let's say, or a masculine, because the gender is not specific to its natural genetic makeup. So we can be a little bit loose with gender. Gender always remains the same with a word, though. A word that is masculine is always going to be masculine in nouns in Greek, and that's really important. The passage we read tonight, Ephesians 2:8, those two words, faith and grace, charite and pistuos, those are both feminine nouns. Now, there's a real interesting thing that happens in that passage, by the way, because we say, by grace you are saved through faith, and this is the gift of God. Well, that this, what is that pointing back to? This is actually neuter. But there's no neuter word. There's only these two feminine nouns there. So we need to figure out what's going on with that. I'll cover that more when I talk about pronouns. But so a Greek noun doesn't change its gender. If it is a masculine gender second declension noun, it will always be a masculine gender second declension noun. If it is a feminine first declension noun, it will always be a feminine first declension noun. There has been a great amount of ink spilt in the history of Christianity over Matthew 16, the words Peter and the word rock. And sometimes the discussion talks about them as if it's the same word, but it just simply changes its gender. In the text, Peter is a masculine noun and rock is a feminine noun. In Greek, they don't change. Okay, Peter is always going to be a masculine second declension noun. Rock, Petra, is always going to be a first declension feminine noun. They just don't change. So there's a passage where the gender of the nouns is relevant to the discussion, and it causes a lot of argument with people. I'm not going to talk about it here because I don't want to get thrown out of my ear by people who might disagree with me. But just know there's a place where you have two words that sound almost exactly like in Greek, Petros and Petra. Even though they sound alike, they're actually two different genders of nouns. In Ephesians 2:8, charite and pistuos, they're both the same gender. They're both feminine. Okay, and then the other thing we have about nouns is we have the number. So nouns are going to be singular or plural. A long time ago in Greek, there were 3 numbers for nouns. Hebrew still has 3, for those of you that know Hebrew. A long time ago in Greek, we had something was singular, right, meaning we had one of them, right? And there was a dual, which means we had 2 of them. And there was anything more than that, which was plural, so that was 3 plus, okay? Hebrew still is that way. Hebrew has, and these dual words, and this makes sense if you think about it. Dual words are things that come in pairs. Eyes are dual. We don't have more than 2 eyes, okay? So eyes is plural. Sometimes, I think hands in some of the Semitic languages are plural. Things that we have 2 of. Greek took all of these duals and shoved them over into the plural a long time before it came to the New Testament. So in New Testament Greek, we don't see these duals. Okay, we only see singular or plural. So in Greek, there's only one, or there's two or more. Those are the only two. Now, this is important because all of this stuff has to agree. And we'll find that out when we get into pronouns. But gender has to agree, number has to agree, and the case has to agree. So when we do adjectives, when we do pronouns, we always have to make sure that everything is agreeing in terms of its function in the sentence, its gender, and its number. Okay? Sometimes in Greek that's really easy. Other times in Greek that's really hard. Because we, like the example in Ephesians 2:8, there we have two feminine nouns, and then we have this pronoun that's neuter. And we go, holy moly, what's that thing pointing back to? Because stuff has to agree in Greek. It has to agree in English too. We'll see that when we talk about pronouns. But so sometimes we have to figure out what's going on. But we always want to make sure that the case matches, that the gender matches, and the number matches when we're dealing with these noun issues. Now we'll find out that adjectives and everything have all this case stuff. Anything that's noun-like, all this case stuff stays the same. So nominatives, genitives, datives, all this stuff will stay the same. Forms are different, and the structure based on the function of that type of word will differ. But once you learn these cases, nominative, genitive, dative, accusative, and vocative, you've learned them. So now you know the 5 functions of noun things. Okay? Questions on any of this? Okay, next week we're going to get into pronouns. And we'll find out that agreement is king when we get into pronouns.